Ezekiel Thornfield worked on shining his finest pair of boots when the sound of war drums began reverberating throughout Cedar Canyon. His body went rigid, the cleaning rag remaining motionless in his grasp, while the steady beating ricocheted against the canyon's stone walls like endless thunder. This particular day should have marked Catherine's long-awaited arrival from Kansas City. For 3 full years, he had lived in solitude on this ranch, building a new existence in Colorado Territory's most remote valley. The closest homestead lay 15 miles distant, which suited his preferences perfectly until this moment arrived. Those drums carried a single unmistakable message. The Kiowa raiding party that had been attacking settlements 50 miles southward was advancing northward, and their proximity was dangerously close. Ezekiel moved onto his front porch, his worn hands clutching the wooden rail tightly. The late afternoon sunlight created elongated shadows over his land, yet something seemed altered, fundamentally wrong. His cattle no longer grazed with peaceful contentment. Instead, they clustered anxiously near the barn, displaying clear signs of distress. Even Marshall, his faithful dog, whimpered quietly with his ears pressed flat against his skull. He retrieved his father's antique spyglass from within the cabin and ascended to the rooftop. The sight that met his eyes through the lens chilled his blood to ice. Dark silhouettes moved along the ridge, with at least 12 visible to his count. However, these weren't mere scouts or a minor raiding force. As he refined the focus, additional figures materialized, and still more. They had positioned themselves at every possible escape route from a valley. The terrible truth struck him with physical force. This wasn't a typical raid, nor were they simply passing through. 400 warriors, perhaps even more, had entirely encircled Cedar Canyon. They had transformed his peaceful refuge into a deadly snare. Ezekiel's throat became parched as thoughts of Catherine filled his mind. Her stagecoach was scheduled to reach him before nightfall, traveling the main route that now cut directly through hostile territory. She remained completely unaware of the danger she was approaching, ignorant that the man she consented to marry without meeting had suddenly become the most perilous person to associate with throughout Colorado Territory. He descended from the roof, his thoughts racing frantically. The prudent choice would involve mounting his horse and attempting escape to the narrow stream bed on the valley's eastern boundary. Perhaps he could evade detection in the approaching darkness. Yet this option meant abandoning Catherine to whatever terrible fate awaited when her stagecoach entered this valley of death. The war drums increased in volume and urgency. They no longer merely announced their presence. They were coordinating, organizing whatever plan they intended to execute. The beginning was imminent. What Ezekiel remained ignorant of was that this war party's leader had been observing him for weeks, waiting precisely for this moment. His bride's arrival was no mere coincidence. Ezekiel loaded his Winchester rifle with trembling hands, tallying his ammunition. 43 rounds against 400 warriors. The mathematics were both simple and horrifying. He had heard tales about isolated settlers caught by war parties of this magnitude. None of those stories concluded favorably. His thoughts turned to Catherine's most recent letter, still creased in his shirt pocket. She had expressed her excitement about finally meeting him, described a new gown she had purchased for their wedding, and shared her enthusiasm about beginning anew in Colorado Territory, where her past remained unknown. She trusted him to provide protection, to offer her the life she had envisioned. Now his very existence might lead to her death. The war drum ceased abruptly. This sudden quiet proved somehow more ominous than the pounding had been. Ezekiel strained his hearing for any sound, but even the wind appeared to have stilled. His cattle stood motionless, as if holding their breath. This represented the calm preceding something dreadful. Then he detected it. Hoofbeats, not the thunderous charge he anticipated, but the steady rhythm of a solitary horse approaching from the southern trail. His heart pounded against his ribs as he grasped the implication. Someone was riding directly into the trap, oblivious to the warriors stationed along every ridge. Through his spyglass, he identified a rider, a young Kiowa brave. Yet something appeared amiss. The warrior held his hands aloft and carried a white cloth attached to a long pole, a truce flag. The horse advanced slowly and purposefully, as though the rider wished to be observed from afar. In his 3 years of valley residence, Ezekiel had never encountered direct contact with any tribal war parties. He had heard they occasionally captured prisoners for negotiation purposes, but this situation felt different, more personal. The brave headed straight toward his cabin, as if he knew precisely where to locate him. The rider halted 50 yards from the porch, within rifle range, yet distant enough to demonstrate he wasn't seeking immediate conflict. He appeared young, perhaps 20 years old, with elaborate war paint covering half his face. What captured Ezekiel's attention were the man's eyes. They didn't contain expected rage, but looked almost satisfied, as if everything was proceeding according to plan. The brave called out in heavily accented English, "Ezekiel Thornfield, we need to talk." The fact that this stranger knew his name sent ice coursing through his veins. Ezekiel stepped onto his porch, rifle prepared but not yet aimed. "Talk about what?" The warrior's lips curved into what might have been a smile. "About the woman you're waiting for. About why we're real. Deception? Who could possibly be worth surrounding an entire valley with a war party?" He searched his past, tried to recall any woman who might have reason to deceive him this way. "You're lying," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Too many pieces were falling into place. The letters had always seemed too perfect, too understanding. Catherine had never requested specific details about his property, never questioned why he had chosen such an isolated location. She had accepted everything without the curiosity a real woman would have displayed. The brave continued, 3 years ago, you were a different man. You lived in a different place. You did things that left marks on people's lives." He gestured toward the ridge lines where the other warriors waited. "She hired us to ensure you can't run when she arrives. She wants to look you in the eye when she tells you who she really is." Ezekiel's legs felt weak. There had been a time before this valley, before he tried to become a simple rancher, a time when he had worn a badge and made enemies, a time when his decisions had consequences that followed people to their graves. He had thought that life was buried, that 3 years of isolation had been sufficient penance. The sound of distant wheels interrupted his thoughts. A stagecoach was ascending the southern trail, just visible through the canyon's mouth. The woman inside believed she was about to meet her future husband, but she was really coming to deliver justice that was 3 years overdue. The identity of the woman on that stagecoach would destroy everything Ezekiel thought he knew about his past. The stagecoach rolled closer, and Ezekiel could hear the driver conversing with his horses, unaware that he was delivering his passenger into the center of a carefully planned trap. The brave watched Ezekiel's face carefully, as if studying every emotion that crossed it. "You still don't remember, do you?" the warrior said. "Sheriff Thornfield of Deadwood Creek, the man who put innocent people in the ground because he was too proud to admit he was wrong." The words hit Ezekiel like bullets. Sheriff Thornfield, a name he tried to bury along with the badge he had thrown into a river 3 years ago. Memories came flooding back. The raid on the trading post, the family caught in the crossfire, the little girl who had screamed as the bullets flew. He had been so certain he was chasing the right men, so convinced he was bringing justice to the frontier. But he had been wrong, dead wrong. "The Morrison family," Ezekiel whispered, the full horror finally hitting him. "Catherine Morrison wasn't coming to marry me. She was already dead because of me." The brave nodded grimly. Her sister Sarah survived that day barely. "She spent 2 years planning this moment, learning everything about you, tracking you down when you disappeared." He gestured toward the approaching stagecoach. "She wrote those letters. She became Catherine in every way that mattered, just to get close enough to look you in the eye." Ezekiel's hands trembled as he lowered his rifle. Sarah Morrison. He remembered her now, a 12-year-old girl hiding behind an overturned wagon while her family bled out in the dirt. He had been too focused on chasing the outlaws to notice that his posse's wild shooting had hit innocent people. By the time he realized his mistake, 3 members of the Morrison family were dead, including little Catherine. The stagecoach was only a few hundred yards away now. Through his spyglass, Ezekiel could see a woman's silhouette in the window. Sarah Morrison, now grown up and coming to collect a debt that had been 3 years in making. What does she want? Ezekiel asked, though he already knew the answer. Justice, the kind you never gave her family. The brave's voice was cold, but not without respect. She could have just hired us to kill you. Would have been simpler. But she wanted you to know why you were dying, Wanted you to remember their faces when the end came. The sound of wheels on gravel grew louder. The driver was starting to slow down, seeing the cabin ahead. In minutes, Sarah Morrison would step out of that stagecoach and face the man who destroyed her childhood in a hail of misdirected bullets. Ezekiel thought about running. His horse was saddled and ready in the barn. But 400 warriors surrounded the valley, and more importantly, he knew he deserved whatever Sarah had planned for him. He had spent 3 years trying to forget what happened at Deadwood Creek. But the dead don't stay buried when the living refuse to let them rest. The stagecoach came to a stop in front of his cabin. The driver tipped his hat and called out cheerfully, "Delivery from Mr. Thornfield. Got your bride here safe and sound." What happened when Sarah Morrison stepped out of that stagecoach would prove that some wounds never heal, and some debts can only be paid in blood. The stagecoach door opened, and a woman stepped down onto the dusty ground. She bore no resemblance to what Ezekiel had imagined Catherine Morrison would look like. This woman was tall and lean, with dark hair pulled back severely and eyes that held the cold fire of someone who had lived with pain for too long. She wore a simple traveling dress, but there was something in the way she moved that reminded him of a predator circling its prey. Sarah Morrison looked exactly like her father. The resemblance was so strong it made Ezekiel's chest tight with guilt. Same strong jawline. Same piercing blue eyes, same way of standing that suggested she wouldn't back down from anything or anyone. The stagecoach driver climbed down to unload her trunk, chattering cheerfully about the beautiful weather and the lovely scenery. He had no idea he had just delivered a woman to her family's killer, or that 400 warriors were watching his every move from the surrounding ridges. Sarah paid the driver and sent him on his way with a smile that never reached her eyes. She waited until the stagecoach disappeared around the bend before she turned to face Ezekiel directly. The transformation was immediate and chilling. The pleasant mask she had worn for the driver's benefit melted away, replaced by 3 years of carefully nurtured hatred. "Hello, Sheriff Thornfield," she said, her voice steady and calm. "Or do you prefer Ezekiel now? I suppose men like you change names as easily as you change towns." Ezekiel set his rifle down against the porch railing. There was no point in pretending anymore. "Sarah, you've grown up. Amazing what surviving a massacre will do to a person." She walked closer, each step deliberate and measured. "I was 12 years old when you rode into our trading post with your posse, guns blazing, chasing shadows, and calling it justice." The brave who had delivered the message remained mounted, watching the confrontation with the patience of someone who knew exactly how this would end. Behind him, Ezekiel could see more warriors moving into position along the canyon walls, not threatening, just present, making sure he understood that running wasn't an option. Sarah stopped 10 feet away from the porch. "I spent 2 years tracking you down after you disappeared from Deadwood Creek. 2 years learning how to write like a lonely woman desperate for love. 2 years perfecting Catherine's voice, so you believe every word." "Why?" Ezekiel asked, though he knew it was a stupid question. "Why not just have them kill me? Why go through all this?" Sarah's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Because a bullet would have been too easy. Too quick. I wanted you to hope first. To believe you'd found happiness. To think you'd escape what you did to my family." Her eyes glittered with unshed tears that had been held back for 3 years. "I wanted you to feel what we felt when your bullets found us instead of the outlaws you were really after." Sarah reached into her traveling bag and pulled out a small wooden box. Ezekiel recognized it immediately. It had belonged to her father, Thomas Morrison. The old man had carved it himself and kept his most precious possessions inside. Seeing it now in Sarah's hands made Ezekiel's stomach turn with fresh guilt. "Do you remember what you said to me that day?" Sarah asked, her voice barely controlled. "After the shooting stopped and you realized what your posse had done?" Ezekiel closed his eyes, the memory hitting him like a physical blow. "I said I was sorry, that it was an accident, that we were chasing dangerous men, and that these things happen on the frontier," Sarah finished. "That my family was in the wrong place at the wrong time. That I should be grateful you caught the real outlaws before they could hurt anyone else." She opened the wooden box, and Ezekiel could see something glinting inside. Not a weapon, but something worse. Evidence. "Except you never caught the real outlaws, did you, Sheriff?" You gave up the chase after what happened to us. Decided the case was too messy, too complicated, too much paperwork. The brave shifted in his saddle, his eyes moving between Sarah and Ezekiel like he was watching a carefully choreographed performance. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about something bigger. Sarah pulled a folded document from a box. I found them, Ezekiel. The men you were really chasing that day. It took me 3 years, but I found them. She unfolded the paper, revealing wanted posters and sworn statements. They're still alive, still robbing, still killing, because you were too ashamed of your mistake to finish what you started. The words hit Ezekiel harder than any bullet could have, in his guilt and horror over the Morrison family's deaths. He had abandoned his badge and fled into the wilderness. He told himself it was penance, that he was removing himself from a job he was too dangerous to perform. But the truth was simpler and more cowardly. He had run away from his responsibilities. The Garrett gang has killed 14 more people since Deadwood Creek, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. 14 people who would still be alive if you had done your job instead of running away to play cowboy in this valley. Ezekiel felt the weight of those deaths settling on his shoulders. Bad enough that he had killed innocent people through his recklessness, but knowing that his cowardice had led to more deaths, more families destroyed, made him feel like he was drowning in guilt. Sarah held up another document. This is a territorial warrant for the Garrett gang. Still active. Still valid. She looked at him with cold determination. You're going to help me finish what you started 3 years ago. You're going to help me hunt them down. And if I refuse? Ezekiel asked, though he already knew the answer. Sarah gestured toward the warriors positioned around the canyon. Then my friends here will make sure you never leave this valley. But your death won't bring back my family, and it won't stop the Garrett gang from killing more innocent people. She stepped closer, her eyes burning with purpose. I want justice, Ezekiel. Real justice, not just revenge. The brave spoke for the first time since Sarah's arrival. The choice is yours, former sheriff. Die here as a coward, or live long enough to maybe earn some small redemption. What Sarah revealed next about the Garrett gang's latest target would force Ezekiel to make the hardest decision of his life. Sarah pulled out a final document from the wooden box, and Ezekiel could see her hands trembling slightly for the first time since she had arrived. The Garrett gang isn't just killing random travelers anymore. Ezekiel, they've gotten organized, smarter. She handed him a telegram dated just 5 days ago. They're planning to hit the children's train next week. Ezekiel's blood went cold as he read the telegram. Every month, a special train carried orphaned children from overcrowded eastern cities to new families in the Western Territories. 43 children, ages 6 to 15, would be on that train, defenseless kids looking for new homes and new hope. The train stops in Millfield to take on water, Sarah continued. Isolated station. No law enforcement for 50 miles in any direction. The gang knows the train carries a strong box with adoption fees and family payments. They don't care that children will be caught in the crossfire. The brave nodded grimly. We've been tracking the Garrett gang for weeks. They have 30 men now, well-armed and desperate. They've been planning this raid for months. Ezekiel felt sick. More innocent children, just like Sarah had been 3 years ago. More families destroyed because he had been too much of a coward to finish what he had started. The pattern was clear. His failures kept multiplying, creating more victims, more pain. Why come to me? Ezekiel asked. You could take this information to the territorial marshal, the cavalry, anyone with real authority. Sarah's laugh was bitter. I tried. They said the intelligence was unreliable because it came from tribal sources. They won't act on the word of Kiowa warriors, even when children's lives are at stake. She gestured toward the brave. Running Elk's people have been watching the gang, gathering evidence, trying to prevent this massacre. But white authorities won't listen to them. Running Elk spoke up. Our children have been taken on trains like this, stolen from their families and sent to boarding schools. We know what it means when children are torn from those who love them. His voice carried deep pain. We will not let more children die because grown men are too proud to work together. Ezekiel realized the full scope of what Sarah had planned. This wasn't just about revenge for her family's deaths. She had forged an alliance between her quest for justice and the Kiowa's desire to protect innocent children. She had turned his guilt into a weapon that could save lives. "The train reaches Millfield in 4 days," Sarah said. "We can get there in 3 if we push hard. You know the Garrett gang's methods better than anyone. You know how they think, how they operate." She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "You can't bring back my family, Ezekiel, but you can save those children." The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the valley. Ezekiel looked at his cabin, his cattle, the simple life he had built to escape his past. All of it suddenly seemed meaningless compared to 43 children who would die if he chose comfort over courage. The decision he was about to make would determine whether he died as the coward who ran from Deadwood Creek, or as the man who finally found the strength to face his failures. Ezekiel walked into his cabin and emerged moments later carrying his sheriff's badge. He had kept it hidden in an old coffee tin, unable to throw it away completely despite his shame. The metal felt cold and heavy in his palm, weighted with all the mistakes he had made and all the chances he had missed to make things right. "I'll help you," he said, pinning the badge to his shirt. "Not because I deserve redemption, but because those children deserve to live." Sarah nodded, and for the first time since she had arrived, something that might have been respect flickered in her eyes. "This won't make us even, Ezekiel. Nothing can bring back my family." "I know," he replied, "but maybe we can stop another family from going through what you did." Running Elk dismounted and approached them both. "My warriors will ride with us. The Garrett gang has stolen from our people, killed our young men, taken our horses. This debt goes both ways." Within an hour, they were ready to leave. Ezekiel had gathered his weapons, supplies, and his best horse. Sarah had changed into practical riding clothes and armed herself with a rifle that looked well used and carefully maintained. The warriors emerged from their positions around the valley, a disciplined force united by their shared desire to protect innocent lives. As they rode out of Cedar Canyon together, Ezekiel realized that Sarah's plan had been perfect from the beginning. She hadn't just wanted to kill him. She had wanted to force him to become the man he should have been 3 years ago, the man who finished what he started, the man who protected the innocent instead of running from his failures. The alliance was strange and fragile. A disgraced former sheriff, a young woman consumed by the need for justice, and a Kiowa war party united in their determination to save children they had never met. But it was also powerful. They had skills the Garrett gang wouldn't expect, knowledge they couldn't anticipate, and motivation that ran deeper than simple greed. The ride to Millfield would take them through dangerous territory, past other settlements that might not welcome the sight of armed Kiowa warriors. But Ezekiel found himself oddly hopeful for the first time in 3 years. Not because he believed he could earn forgiveness. Some mistakes were too big for that, but because he finally had the chance to use his guilt for something productive. Sarah rode beside him in silence for the first few miles, then spoke quietly. "My father always said that good men weren't the ones who never made mistakes. They were the ones who found the courage to fix their mistakes, no matter how much it cost them." Ezekiel nodded, understanding that this was as close to forgiveness as he would ever get from her. It would have to be enough. For days later, when the children's train pulled into Millfield Station, it would find not just the Garrett gang waiting in ambush, but also a force of determined protectors ready to ensure that this time, the innocent would not pay the price for evil men's greed. The man who had once been too coward to face his failures was finally ready to become the sheriff he should have been all along.